There are two stories coming out of Indiana's win over the Chicago Sky, and if you only pay attention to one of them, you are missing the entire picture. The first story is historic, genuinely, undeniably, put it in the record books, historic. The second story is a slow-burning organizational disaster that keeps getting buried under the scoreboard every single time Indiana manages to escape with a win. And the reason both stories matter equally is because one of them is being used to hide the other. Caitlin Clark just delivered one of the most complete individual performances in WNBA history. She also just had to do it again for what appears to be the third consecutive game because the people around her keep creating fires that only she seems capable of putting out. That is not a sustainable formula for a franchise that came into the season talking about championships. That is a franchise riding one player's brilliance past a series of self-inflicted crises and calling it progress. So let us actually talk about what happened, all of it, without looking away from the parts that are uncomfortable. Because Clark deserves better than a highlight reel. She deserves an honest accounting of what she is doing and what she is being asked to overcome to do it. Start with the box score, because the box score demands respect before anything else gets said. 32 points, 10 assists, 7 rebounds, 13 free throw attempts, all 13 converted, 8 of 18 from the field. That is a 32-point double-double from a guard in a professional basketball game, and the numbers alone do not fully communicate how significant the performance was in context. But here is the number that matters most when you start stacking everything together. 13 for 13 from the free throw line. Perfect. Not one miss, not one moment of hesitation. Every single attempt converted, in a game where Clark was attacking, drawing contact, and operating as the unquestioned offensive force this team becomes when the coaching environment actually allows it. And then there's Aaliyah Boston. 34 points and 12 rebounds on 13 of 26 shooting from the field. Genuine high-volume efficiency from a player operating at the peak of what her individual skill set produces when she is given the right structure around her. Boston's night was not a product of the opponent being weak or the circumstances being unusually favorable. It was a product of Clark and Boston operating in the two-woman pick-and-roll combination that the analytics have consistently identified as the most dangerous offensive action this Indiana team runs. When Clark has the ball, when Boston is setting real screens that create genuine separation, when the defense is being forced to choose between stopping a guard who can pull up from anywhere and a forward rolling to a position of interior advantage, this team is nearly impossible to contain. That is what happened when that combination was working on this night. That is what the box score reflects. And here's why both of those performances matter beyond their individual impressiveness. What Clark and Boston produced in this game was a WNBA first. The first time in the history of the league that two teammates each recorded 30-point double-doubles in the same game. Not just a great performance, not just two players having good nights simultaneously, a genuine historical first that belongs in the permanent record of what women's professional basketball has produced at its absolute ceiling. The kind of performance combination that gets referenced for years. The kind of night that, under normal circumstances, produces the kind of dominant wire-to-wire victory that a team talks about for weeks as evidence of what they are capable of when everything is clicking. Indiana nearly blew a 19-point lead to a team with 4 wins. Let that settle for a second, because the contrast is jarring enough that it needs space to breathe. A 19-point lead against the Chicago Sky, a team that entered this game with a 4-12 record, a team that possessed no individual talent capable of consistently containing Clark when Clark is given the ball and the organizational commitment to let her operate. A team that by every measurable competitive standard available before tip-off should not have been capable of making this game close, let alone forcing overtime against an Indiana roster with the talent differential that exists between these two franchises. And yet, overtime, a 19-point advantage that required a historic individual performance just to survive. The question is not whether Indiana won. They did. The question is how a team with that talent advantage, playing against that specific opponent with that specific lead in that specific competitive situation, comes within one Skylar Diggins three-pointer of losing. And the answer to that question is not bad luck. It is not unfortunate bounces. It is not the unpredictable chaos that basketball occasionally produces, regardless of talent or preparation. The answer is specific, documented, and directly traceable to coaching decisions and execution failures that have become the defining pattern of this Indiana Fever season. Not a one-game anomaly, not an isolated incident, a pattern. And this game added several new entries to the already substantial record of what that pattern looks like in practice. The story of how Indiana nearly gave this game away starts with one possession and one decision that had a single correct answer that was not executed. Indiana is up 5 points, approximately 1 minute remaining. The possession belongs to Indiana. Stop there, because in that specific competitive situation, the decision tree for any professional basketball player at any level of competitive experience is not complicated. You hold the ball, you run the clock, you make them foul you if they want possession back. You do not create unnecessary shot attempts in a moment where the game is effectively won as long as you do not give it back. That is not advanced basketball strategy. That is the most basic form of late-game management that exists. The kind of understanding that is drilled into players from the time they are in middle school recreation leagues. Hold the ball, run the clock, make them foul you. Kelsey Mitchell drove directly into a contested shot attempt. She missed the layup. Chicago got the ball back with time restored, momentum rebuilt, and a suddenly realistic path back into a game they had no business being in. One possession, one decision that had exactly one correct answer and produced the opposite of that answer. And while a single missed layup can feel like a random event in isolation, this missed layup was not random. It was the product of a decision-making failure in a situation where the decision was explicit. Mitchell did not misread a complicated defensive scheme. She did not make a calculated gamble that happened not to pay off. She executed a drive in a moment where driving was the one thing that should not happen, in a coaching environment that had not produced the late-game clarity necessary for her to understand what that moment required. That is on Kelsey Mitchell, and it is also on the environment that produced it. But the possession that truly defined what this coaching staff is and what it is not came immediately after, and it is the kind of decision that, once you see it clearly, is very difficult to explain away. Indiana is up 3. Clark has just gone 13 from 13 from the free throw line. Not 10 for 12, not 11 for 13, perfect. Every single attempt converted throughout the entire game, in every pressure situation, every critical moment, every trip to the line when the competitive stakes were highest. Clark is the player on this team who has demonstrated in real time, in this specific game, that she converts free throws at a perfect rate when the game is on the line. The inbound play was designed to get the ball to Kelsey Mitchell. Read that again. Indiana needed to inbound the basketball in a game situation where a foul would send the ball to the free throw line, where Clark converts at 100% on the night and would effectively end Chicago's competitive threat with 2 made free throws. The player on the floor who had demonstrated perfect free throw conversion all game was available. The play design directed the ball away from that player and toward a different player. The ball hit Mitchell's leg and went out of bounds. Chicago ball, Skylar Diggins caught it, stepped back, and made the three-pointer that sent the game to overtime. There is no version of that sequence that reflects well on the coaching staff's in-game decision-making. None. This is not second-guessing a call that could have gone either way. This is not a situation where reasonable basketball minds could disagree about the right answer. The correct answer was written on the stat sheet in real time. Clark was perfect from the free throw line. Put the ball in Clark's hands, make Chicago foul her, convert the free throws, win the basketball game without overtime. The coaching staff designed a play that moved the ball away from that answer and directly into overtime. That is a coaching failure. It is specific, documented, and not ambiguous. And it is connected to something larger that this season has been building toward as an unavoidable conclusion. But before the full picture comes into focus, let us talk about Sydney Taylor, because her 30-point performance off the Chicago bench adds its own specific and damning layer to the coaching accountability story. Taylor is an undrafted rookie. Let that establish the baseline. Not a veteran role player, not an established contributor with a documented track record of producing against quality competition, an undrafted rookie who came off the bench and in a 3-minute stretch of the third quarter scored 16 points against Indiana's defense. 16 points in 3 minutes. That was the primary engine of Chicago's lead erasure. That was the specific competitive mechanism that turned Indiana's comfortable advantage into a crisis. And here is the coaching decision that sits at the center of that crisis. Raven Johnson was assigned to defend Taylor during that stretch. Lexi Hall was available and had been demonstrably more effective when she was on the floor in the defensive matchup situations that this game had produced before that run. The coaching staff had access to that information in real time. Hall versus Taylor was a better defensive alignment than Johnson versus Taylor. The evidence supported that conclusion clearly enough that it was not a close analytical call. And yet Johnson remained in the assignment while Taylor scored 16 points in 3 minutes and turned a controlled Indiana victory into a competitive emergency. When Hall finally entered the game to defend Taylor, the scoring run stopped immediately. That single fact is the most complete summary of the coaching decision available. The solution was on the bench. The solution had been demonstrably effective in previous matchup situations during this game. The solution sat while the problem compounded, and when the solution was finally deployed, it worked immediately and completely. The distance between when that solution should have been deployed and when it actually was deployed is a direct measurement of what this coaching staff cost Indiana in this game. That is not an abstract analytical critique. That is a specific, real-time decision with a specific real-time consequence and a specific real-time correction that arrived later than the competitive evidence demanded. That is the coaching record of this game in one sequence. Now step back and look at the full picture, because the individual decisions in this game do not exist in isolation. They are entries in a season-long record that has been building with remarkable consistency since the first week of competition. The pattern is not complicated once you see it clearly. Clark performs at an extraordinary individual level. The coaching decisions and execution failures around that performance create a competitive situation that should not exist given the talent available. Clark delivers an individual performance that rescues the result. The coaching staff avoids accountability because the scoreboard ultimately reads in Indiana's favor. The cycle repeats in the next game. This has happened 3 consecutive times now. 3 consecutive games where the coaching decisions created a crisis that Clark's individual brilliance resolved. 3 consecutive wins that are being recorded in the standings as evidence of Indiana's competitive quality, while the process of producing those wins documents something significantly more alarming about the organizational environment surrounding the most talented player this franchise has ever had. And here is the number that most completely captures what this organizational pattern looks like from the outside. 0 free throw attempts versus 13. In games where the offensive system is designed around Clark attacking with the ball and the freedom to make decisions as the primary creative force, Clark gets to the free throw line 13 times and converts every single attempt. In games where the offensive system routes possessions through other players rather than organizing around Clark's attacking capabilities, Clark records 0 free throw attempts in 34 minutes of professional basketball. 0. The same player, the same skill set, the same competitive drive. 0 or 13, depending entirely on what the coaching staff decides to build the offensive system around on a given night. That gap is not a small analytical detail. That gap is the entire story of what this Indiana Fever team is and what it is failing to consistently be. The pick-and-roll combination between Clark and Boston is the most analytically efficient offensive action this team runs. That is not a subjective evaluation. That is what the evidence of this season has produced as a documented conclusion. When Boston sets real screens that create genuine separation, when Clark is making decisions at the point of attack, with Boston rolling to the interior or spotting up for the kickout, when the defense is forced into impossible choices between the two most dangerous offensive players on the floor, Indiana is the best version of itself. The sequences in this game where that combination was functioning at its peak produced a historic statistical result. 2 teammates, 30-plus point double-doubles, a first in WNBA history. That is what the Clark and Boston pick-and-roll looks like when it is operating as the primary offensive mechanism. It is not the primary offensive mechanism. It is the exception, the sequence the coaching staff dips into occasionally rather than the foundation around which the entire offensive structure is built. The plays that get called when nothing else is working, rather than the starting point from which everything else is designed to flow. And that organizational choice, treating the most efficient and historically productive offensive action this team runs as a situational adjustment rather than a system, is the clearest possible illustration of the gap between what the Indiana Fever are and what they could be with the talent currently on their roster. In the best moments of this game, Clark with the ball, Boston setting real screens, the pick and roll functioning the way the analytics say it should function every possession, this duo is historic. In the other moments, Mitchell hunting individual shot creation in situations that call for clock management, inbound plays designed to keep the ball away from the player who has been perfect from the free throw line all game, defensive matchup decisions that deploy less effective personnel while more effective options wait on the bench, this team nearly loses to a 4-8 opponent from 19 points up. Both of those teams exist simultaneously. One of them shows up when the coaching decisions align with what the evidence demands. The other shows up when they do not. And across this season, the coaching decisions have not consistently aligned with what the evidence demands. That is the record. That is what the documentation shows. Caitlin Clark went 13 for 13 from the free throw line. She finished with 32 points and 10 assists in a game that went to overtime against a team with 4 wins. She made every critical shot when the competitive situation demanded it. She performed at a level that produced a historical first in a league that has been played for decades. She did all of it despite the coaching decisions and execution failures that created the competitive crisis in the first place. And when the overtime period required someone to step forward and close the game, she was there, again, for what appears to be the 3rd consecutive time. That is an extraordinary individual achievement. It is also an indictment of the organizational environment that keeps making extraordinary individual achievements a requirement for Indiana to survive games they should be winning comfortably. Clark is not bailing out a competitive process that occasionally stumbles. She is consistently compensating for an organizational pattern that systematically creates more competitive difficulty than this roster's talent level should require. There is a meaningful difference between those two things, and collapsing them into each other because the scoreboard ultimately reads in Indiana's favor is exactly the kind of analytical dishonesty that allows the pattern to continue unchallenged. The win is in the record. The historic 30-point double-double partnership between Clark and Boston is in the history books. the 19-point lead that was nearly surrendered to the Chicago Sky because of specific, documented, consequential coaching and execution failures is equally in the record. All three of those things are true simultaneously. None of them cancel any of the others out. The story of this Indiana Fever season is not a story about a team finding ways to win. It is a story about one player finding ways to win despite everything being built around her. And until the organizational decisions start reflecting what the evidence has been saying all season long, that story is not going to change. Clark will keep performing at a historic level, the coaching decisions will keep creating crises that should not exist, and Indiana will keep surviving those crises only because of the one variable on their roster that no amount of organizational dysfunction has yet been able to contain. But that is not a championship formula. It is not even a sustainable one. And somewhere between the historic box score and the overtime against a 4-8 team, that is the truth that this Indiana Fever season keeps insisting everyone look at directly.